My name is Amelia Thorne, and I'm 42 years old. For 20 of those years, I wore the uniform of a United States Army officer. I served as a logistician, a master of supply chains, moving everything from beans to bullets across deserts and continents. It was a life of service, of precision, of quiet pride. But I never expected that the skills I honed in war zones would become the weapons I'd use in the most unexpected battle of my life, a battle against my own family. My brother, a man who built his fortune on sleek technology and sharp suits, laughed at my modest military pension. He had no idea that one day the woman he ridiculed would be the one signing his paychecks. It's a strange thing, how life works. The people who think they know you best are often the ones who see you the least. Before I dive into how a forgotten little trucking company became the key to my vindication, I want to hear from you. Let me know where in the world you're watching from in the comments below. It's always incredible to see how far these stories travel. And if you've ever been underestimated or had your dreams belittled by someone you love, do me a favor and hit that like button. It helps to know you're not alone. And for all the new viewers, make sure you subscribe to join our community of people who believe in turning setbacks into comebacks. Now let's go back to the day it all began, the day my first life ended and my second one was about to start. The retirement ceremony was a blur of crisp uniforms, starched flags, and handshakes that felt both firm and final. The air in the Fort Lee Auditorium was thick with the scent of floor polish and the weight of tradition. General Miller, a man whose gravelly voice had directed operations across half the globe, stood at the podium. His words about my service, about my unflinching dedication to the logistical backbone of the Army, were generous. He spoke of missions in Afghanistan, of hurricane relief efforts in the States, of the complex, invisible web of supply and demand that I had managed for 2 decades. I stood straight, my back a rod of discipline forged over 20 years. But inside, a strange new feeling was taking root. Uncertainty. For the first time since I was 22, I had no mission, no orders, no defined objective. My life, which had been a series of meticulously planned logistical movements, was now an open, unmarked map. As the general pinned the Legion of Merit to my chest, the weight of the medal was nothing compared to the weight of the silence that I knew would follow. That evening, my brother Richard hosted a celebratory dinner at a restaurant where the wine list was thicker than most novels. The place was all dark wood, hushed tones, and waiters who moved with the silent efficiency of ghosts. Richard thrived in environments like this. He was a man tailored for success, from his bespoke suit to his perfectly sculpted hair. He ran Thorne Precision, a company that manufactured high-tech components for the aerospace and medical industries. He was brilliant, driven, and had always viewed my military career with a kind of bemused, patronizing affection, as if I were engaged in a particularly long and elaborate piece of historical reenactment. He raised his glass, the crystal ringing with a clear, expensive note. "To Amelia," he announced to the table, which included a few of his business associates who looked at me with polite curiosity. 20 years of service, a remarkable achievement. We're all very proud. The words were right, but the tone was off. It was the same tone he used when praising his daughter for a finger painting. It was praise that diminished, a pat on the head for the quaint, less ambitious sibling. I smiled, a tight, practiced gesture. "Thank you, Richard. It was an honor to serve." The conversation quickly turned to his world: mergers, market caps, intellectual property. I listened quietly, feeling like an anthropologist studying a foreign tribe. Then, during a lull, Richard leaned toward me, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper that was meant to sound like concern. "So, Mia, what's the plan now? I've looked into the officer pension. It's respectable for a civil servant." He let the words hang in the air, laden with unspoken judgment. "I suppose it's enough to get a nice little condo down in Florida, play some golf. You've earned the rest." I felt a familiar, hot prickle of anger behind my eyes, but my training kept my face a mask of calm. "I haven't decided yet, Richard. I'm exploring my options." He chuckled, a low, dismissive sound that grated on my nerves. "Options? Mia, be realistic. You've been in a bubble for 20 years. The private sector is a different beast. It's not about following orders, it's about creating value. He took a sip of his wine, his eyes scanning my simple black dress as if it were a tactical deficiency. That pension, what is it really? 50, 60,000 a year? It's a nice safety net, but it's not a foundation. It's not going to build anything. He gestured around the opulent restaurant. This is what building looks like. This is what real-world success provides. The condescension was a physical thing, a pressure in my chest. He saw my life's work, my sacrifices, the immense and complex responsibility I'd shouldered, and reduced it to a line item on a budget, finding it wanting. He saw a pension, not the pride and purpose that came with it. He saw a woman who needed to be put out to pasture, not an expert in one of the most critical fields of modern commerce. At that moment, something inside me shifted. The uncertainty I'd felt at the ceremony began to harden, to crystallize into a new, sharp-edged objective. I didn't want a condo in Florida. I didn't want to rest. I wanted to build something. And I wanted to do it in a world he thought I couldn't possibly understand. I looked at my brother, at his smug, assured face, and I made a silent promise to myself. He would be proven wrong. He had no idea what a logistician with a little bit of capital and a whole lot of motivation could accomplish. His ridicule wasn't an insult. It was fuel. The weeks that followed were a strange purgatory. I went through the motions of civilian life, setting up a new apartment, trading my combat boots for running shoes, and fielding well-meaning but off-the-mark job offers from defense contractors. They wanted to put me behind a desk, to have me manage spreadsheets for projects I'd have no real stake in. They wanted Major Thorne, the safe, reliable officer. They didn't want Mia, the woman simmering with a newly discovered and volatile ambition. Richard would call every few days, his voice dripping with that same feigned concern. "Found a nice golf community for you to look at," he'd say. Or, "A friend of mine has a VP of Human Resources opening. It's a cushy gig, not too demanding." Each call was a fresh log on the fire he'd lit under me. I spent my nights not on real estate websites, but on business brokerage forums. I devoured books on small business administration, on corporate finance, on everything the Army hadn't taught me. I was conducting reconnaissance on a new battlefield. Richard was right about one thing: the private sector was a different beast. But he was wrong about my ability to hunt it. I wasn't looking for a cushy gig. I was looking for a problem to solve. I was looking for a broken system to fix. It was a Tuesday, late at night, when I found it. A small, unassuming ad on a business for sale website. Gritstone hauling, established local trucking company, motivated seller. The photos were grim. 4 rusty, tired-looking flatbed trucks parked in a gravel lot overgrown with weeds. A small, cinder-block office that looked like it had lost a fight with time. The description was full of euphemisms. Classic equipment with lots of life left. A loyal, if small, client base. Huge potential for a hands-on owner. I translated it in my head. Ancient trucks on their last legs, 2 or 3 clients who hadn't found a better option yet, and a business on the verge of total collapse. It was perfect. The next morning, I drove out to the address. It was in an industrial park on the forgotten side of the city, a place of rust-stained warehouses and the distant clang of metal. The reality was even bleaker than the pictures. The air smelled of stale diesel, damp earth, and failure. I met the owner, a man named Old Man Henderson, whose shoulders were permanently slumped under the weight of his debts. He had the defeated eyes of a man who had been fighting a losing battle for too long. He'd inherited the company from his father and had simply run it into the ground through a combination of bad luck and a lack of modern business sense. He gave me a tour of the yard. "She ain't much to look at," he mumbled, kicking a loose chunk of gravel. "But these old Macs, they're tough." I walked over to one of the trucks. Its red paint faded to a dull, sun-bleached pink. I ran my hand over a patch of rust on the fender. I looked at the tires, worn and cracked. I peeked into the greasy, chaotic mess of the maintenance bay. Everything screamed neglect. To anyone else, it would have been a financial graveyard. To me, it was a logistical puzzle, a system that had completely broken down. I saw the inefficiencies, the lack of preventative maintenance, the wasted fuel from poor routing, the absence of any real dispatch protocol. I didn't see 4 broken down trucks. I saw a fleet waiting to be optimized. "Why are you selling?" I asked, my voice direct. Henderson sighed, a long, rattling sound. "The bank's calling. Insurance is killing me. Can't find good drivers who want to run in these old rigs. Can't afford new rigs. It's a snake eating its own tail, ma'am." He looked at me, a woman in jeans and a simple jacket, and his eyes held a flicker of pity. "This ain't a business well, for you." I knew what he meant. For a woman, for someone who didn't look like she'd spent her life around diesel engines. He had no idea he was talking to someone who had coordinated the movement of entire armored brigades. "How much?" I asked. He named a number that was shockingly low, a price that spoke of pure desperation. It was still more than I had in liquid savings, but it was within reach. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by my own financial documents, my life savings, carefully accumulated over 20 years, my pension statements. I spent hours building a business plan, a multi-phase strategy for turning Gritstone around. Phase 1, stabilize. Phase 2, optimize. Phase 3, grow. I ran projections, calculated risks, and identified contingencies. The next day, I walked into a bank that specialized in via small business loans. I didn't present myself as a dreamer. I presented myself as a logistician. I laid out my plan, my background, my analysis of Gritstone's failures and its potential. I wasn't selling a vision. I was presenting a mission briefing. The loan officer, a veteran himself, saw past the rust and the weeds. He saw the logic. He saw the plan. He approved the loan. The day I signed the papers with Henderson, my hand was shaking, but not from fear. It was from a surge of adrenaline I hadn't felt since my first command. I handed him the check, a single piece of paper that represented my entire past and my only future. He looked at it, then at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Good luck, ma'am," he said, stuffing the check into his pocket as if he was afraid I'd change my mind. "You're gonna need it." As he walked away, I stood alone in the center of my new dilapidated kingdom. The silence of the yard was broken only by the wind whistling through a broken window in the office. I took a deep breath. The smell of diesel and neglect was still there. But now, it smelled like opportunity. It smelled like mine. I thought of Richard in his gleaming office tower, and a small, determined smile touched my lips. The game was on. My first day as the owner of Gritstone Hauling was a cold, gray morning that perfectly matched the mood of the 3 drivers and 1 mechanic who constituted my entire staff. I found them huddled in the grimy break room, nursing styrofoam cups of what smelled like burnt coffee. The room was a museum of neglect, with a sagging couch, a flickering fluorescent light, and a calendar on the wall that was 2 years out of date. 4 pairs of eyes fixed on me as I walked in. They were steeped in skepticism, colored by years of broken promises from the previous owner. I introduced myself. "Good morning, I'm Amelia Thorne, I'm the new owner." Silence. A man with a thick beard and a trucker hat that read, "Diesel is in my blood." I'd later learn his name was Dave, let out a short, humorless snort. The mechanic, a wiry older man with grease etched into the lines of his face like a second set of fingerprints, just stared, his arms crossed over his chest. His name was Frank Kowalski, and his expression made it clear he'd seen it all and wasn't impressed by any of it. I knew a big, rah-rah speech would be worse than useless. These men didn't trade in words. They traded in miles, in tonnage, in engines that worked and dispatchers who didn't send them on fool's errands. "I'm not going to stand here and make a lot of promises," I said, keeping my voice even. "I know this place has problems. My job is to fix them. My only rule is this: we do the job right, and we do it safely. Paychecks will be on time. That's it for now. Let's get to work." The reception was frosty. Dave smirked at one of the other drivers. Frank just grunted and turned to leave the room. "The number 3 truck has a bad injector," he threw over his shoulder. "Been telling Henderson for a month. It's not going anywhere." It was a test, a challenge thrown down on the greasy floor of the garage. I followed him out into the maintenance bay. The cavernous space was cold and the air was heavy. The truck in question, Old Red, was parked over the service pit, its hood tilted open like a gaping mouth. Frank grabbed a wrench, his movements slow and deliberate, as if daring me to say something. Instead of retreating to the office, I walked over to the toolbox. I scanned its contents, found a pair of clean coveralls Henderson had left behind, and pulled them on over my clothes. Frank paused, wrench in hand, and watched me. I tied my hair back, then grabbed a pair of work gloves. "Show me," I said. For a moment, he just stared. Then a flicker of something, surprise? Respect? Crossed his face. He grunted again, a different kind of grunt this time, and pointed. "The fuel line to the third cylinder. It's clogged solid. We need to pull the whole injector, clean it, maybe replace it. Don't have a new one." For the next 3 hours, I worked alongside him. I didn't pretend to be a master mechanic, but I knew my way around an engine. I knew how to follow instructions, how to hold a tool, how to listen. I passed him wrenches, held the flashlight steady, and cleaned parts with a diesel-soaked rag until my hands were as black as his. We didn't talk much. We worked. The silence was filled with the clatter of metal, the scrape of tools, and the slow, steady rhythm of repair. By lunchtime, we had the injector out, cleaned, and reseated. Frank turned the key, and after a moment of sputtering protest, the big diesel engine rumbled to life, settling into a steady, powerful rhythm. He let it run for a minute, listening intently, then shut it off. He wiped his hands on an already filthy rag and looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. "You ain't afraid to get your hands dirty," he said. It wasn't a compliment. It was a statement of fact, delivered with a tone of grudging approval. "An officer's job is to know the mission from the ground up, Frank," I replied, pulling off the grimy gloves. "This is the ground." It was a small moment, but it was a start. A single, hard-won inch of territory on my new battlefield. The other drivers had watched the whole thing from a distance. They didn't say anything, but their expressions were a little less hostile, a little more curious. I had passed the first test, but I knew the real war, the one against failing equipment, dwindling cash, and looming deadlines, had just begun. That war declared itself in spectacular fashion less than a week later. Dave, the skeptical driver, was halfway to Cleveland with a load of structural steel for a construction project, our most important and highest-paying client. The call came in at 3 a.m. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and I jolted awake, my heart pounding with the familiar adrenaline of a crisis call. "Boss?" It was Dave, his voice tight with frustration. "The transmission on this piece of junk just gave out. I'm on the side of the interstate, middle of nowhere. I'm not going to make the 7 a.m. delivery window." My mind went into mission planning mode. Problem: critical asset down, mission failure imminent. Objective: deliver cargo on time, maintain client relationship. Assets available: 2 functioning trucks, 1 truck in the yard awaiting parts, 1 driver sleeping at home. "Stay with the truck, Dave. I'm working on it." I hung up and immediately started making calls. The client, a site foreman named McGregor, was my first priority. I reached him at 5 a.m. He was, to put it mildly, furious. "Thorne, I've got a crew of 20 iron workers standing around getting paid to do nothing if that steel isn't here by 7. Henderson pulled this stunt all the time. I was told things would be different with you." "They are different, Mr. McGregor," I said, my voice calm and steady despite the frantic calculations happening in my head. "You will have your steel. I need you to push the crane rental to 8 a.m. I will cover the extra cost." There was a pause. "You've got 1 shot," he growled, and hung up. Next, I called Mike, my other available driver, and woke him up. "I need you at the yard in 30 minutes. Then I called a 24-hour heavy towing service I had researched in my first few days. A contingency plan already in place. I gave them Dave's location. The plan was a complex, high-risk logistical ballet. Mike would take my 1 remaining functional truck to a pre-arranged meeting point with a local flatbed rental I'd found on the route. The tow truck would haul Dave's broken rig there. They would have to transfer the entire load of steel from 1 trailer to another on the side of a busy access road. It was dangerous, time-consuming, and expensive. But it wasn't enough. It was too slow. I looked at the map. There was a specialized bolt assembly required to secure the steel that was in Dave's cab. Without it, the transfer was impossible. There was no time to send it with the rental. New problem: critical component separated from main asset. There was only one solution. I grabbed the keys to my personal pickup truck, threw a thermos of coffee on the passenger seat, and drove. I met Mike at the yard, gave him his instructions and a fistful of cash for expenses, and then I drove like a bat out of hell towards Ohio. I found the rendezvous point, an old, abandoned way station, just as the sun was starting to burn the fog off the fields. The tow truck had just arrived. Dave stood there, looking cold and defeated. I handed him the coffee and the bolt assembly. "Let's get this done," I said. For the next hour, I wasn't the boss. I was part of the crew. I was out there in the cold, helping them guide the massive steel beams from one truck to the other with chains and sheer muscle. It was grueling, dirty work. By the time they were done, Mike was ready to roll. He roared off towards Cleveland, a cloud of diesel smoke in his wake. He made it to McGregor's site at 7:58 a.m. Mission accomplished. I stayed behind with Dave and the tow truck. As we watched Mike disappear down the highway, Dave turned to me. He was covered in grease and looked exhausted. "Henderson would have just told the client tough luck," he said, his voice quiet. "He never would have done this." He gestured to my pickup, the frantic plan, my own dirty hands. "I thought you were just another suit," he admitted. I was wrong. I just nodded, too tired to say much. My bank account was crying, I hadn't slept, and I had a very expensive transmission to replace. But as I stood there on the cracked pavement of that forgotten way station, I knew I had won more than just a contract. I had won a soldier. The war was far from over, but for the first time, I wasn't fighting it alone. The aftermath of the Cleveland run was a brutal lesson in financial reality. The tow, the truck rental, the overtime for the driver, and McGregor's crane fee had wiped out the profit from the job and then some. My company's bank account, already perilously low, was now gasping for air. For a few days, a cold dread settled in my stomach. Was Richard right? Was I in over my head? I spent hours staring at spreadsheets, the red numbers mocking me. One night, I almost picked up the phone to call him, to admit defeat, to ask for a loan. The thought of the smug satisfaction in his voice was the only thing that stopped me. My pride, it turned out, was a more powerful motivator than my fear. Instead of admitting defeat, I doubled down on my strategy. If I couldn't afford to fail, I had to be smarter than everyone else. I found a small local company that was about to go under. They had a contract to haul specialized, oversized ventilation units to a new hospital being built 2 states away. It was a difficult job, requiring special permits, escort vehicles, and incredibly precise timing to meet the crane schedule. The bigger hauling companies had quoted astronomical prices because of the hassle. The small company had underbid to get the job and now realized they couldn't possibly fulfill it without losing a fortune. I went to see them. I didn't offer to buy the contract. I offered a partnership. My proposal was simple. Gritstone would handle the entire logistical planning and execution. We would secure the permits, plot the route, schedule the escorts, and guarantee on-time delivery. They would provide their newer, more reliable truck and driver for the actual haul, and we would split the profit 60-40, with my company taking the smaller share. Their owner was skeptical. "How can you guarantee it?" "No one can guarantee a run that complex." I spent the last 10 years of my life planning and executing convoys through hostile territory, I told him, my voice flat and confident. Coordinating with air support, route clearance teams, and multiple ground units. A hospital in Indiana is not hostile territory. I can guarantee it. He looked at my face, at the complete absence of doubt in my eyes, and he agreed. For the next week, my little office became a command center. I was back in my element. I was on the phone with state troopers in 3 different states, with permit offices, with the construction foreman. I mapped out every mile of the route, identifying potential bottlenecks, construction zones, and rest stops. I created a minute-by-minute schedule with contingencies for weather, traffic, and mechanical failure. The day of the haul, I was a nervous wreck on the inside, but a calm commander on the outside. I monitored the truck's progress via GPS on my laptop, getting updates from the driver every hour. The plan worked. It worked flawlessly. The truck arrived at the hospital construction site 17 minutes ahead of schedule. The check for our 40% cleared 2 days later. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a lifeline. It was enough to pay for Dave's new transmission and cover payroll for the next month. That Friday, I bought a dozen pizzas and a few cases of cheap beer and brought them to the garage. I gathered Frank, Dave, and my other two drivers. We sat on overturned buckets and tool chests in the bay, the smell of pepperoni mixing with the scent of diesel. "We pulled it off," I said, raising a can of beer. "All of us." Dave, taking a huge bite of pizza, nodded. "That was one hell of a plan, boss." Frank, who had been meticulously inspecting the newly installed transmission in Dave's truck, wiped his hands and came over. He took a slice of pizza, a rare smile cracking his greasy face. "You know your stuff, Major," he said, the title now a term of clear respect. "You really do." We weren't a failing company anymore. We were a team, we were survivors, and we were just getting started. The small victory of the hospital run marked a turning point. It wasn't just about the money, it was about proof of concept. My methods worked. The discipline and meticulous planning I'd learned in the Army were not liabilities in the civilian world, they were my superpower. I began to systematically overhaul every aspect of gritstone hauling. The first thing to go was the chaotic, gut-feeling dispatch system. I installed a massive whiteboard in the office, dividing it into a grid. Trucks, drivers, loads, destinations, maintenance schedules. It was low-tech, but it was a system. For the first time, we had a clear visual representation of all our assets and missions. Next came preventative maintenance. Frank and I created a detailed checklist and schedule for every truck. No more waiting for things to break. Every truck was brought into the bay for regular inspection and service, whether it seemed to need it or not. The drivers grumbled at first about the downtime. "If it ain't broke, don't fix it," was a common refrain. "It's not broken because we're fixing it," I'd reply, unyielding. Within a few months, our roadside breakdowns dropped to zero. The drivers stopped grumbling when they realized their rigs were reliable and their paychecks were fatter from uninterrupted runs. I also instituted mandatory post-run debriefs. Every driver, after every job, had to fill out a simple form. Route conditions, fuel consumption, loading, unloading times, client feedback. We were gathering data. We started identifying which routes were most fuel efficient, which clients had slow docks that cost us time, and which roads were notorious for traffic. We were no longer just driving. We were learning, adapting, optimizing. We were becoming a logistics company, not just a trucking company. The changes were starting to pay off. We were profitable, albeit narrowly. We were reliable, which was a novelty in our weight class. But I knew that to truly grow, I needed more than just operational excellence. I needed a modern business mind. That's when I hired Sarah Chen. She was a recent MBA graduate, sharp as a tack and hungry for a challenge. I found her through a university job fair. She was interviewing with big, flashy corporations, but something in my pitch, the chance to build something from the ground up, intrigued her. Sarah looked at my whiteboard command center and my binder full of handwritten data sheets with a mixture of horror and fascination. "This is amazing," she said. "The data you're collecting is gold, but we need to get it out of this binder and into a proper system." She was a whirlwind of modernization. She built us a real database, created a professional-looking website, and designed marketing materials that made us look like the serious, reliable company we were becoming. She also took over the financial planning, and her first major proposal was a terrifying one. "We need to secure financing for 2 new trucks," she said, showing me a spreadsheet full of projections. "The maintenance costs and poor fuel economy of the old Macs are a drain. New equipment will lower our operational costs and allow us to take on more lucrative long-haul contracts. It's a risk, but it's a bigger risk not to do it." Taking on that much debt was a massive leap of faith. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. But Sarah's logic was undeniable. We were at the limit of what our old equipment could do. I trusted my gut and I trusted her numbers. We spent weeks preparing a loan application, a document far more sophisticated than the one I had first taken to the VA. This time we had a year of performance data to back up our plans. We had proof of our turnaround. The bank, seeing a company with a clear growth strategy and a proven leader, approved the loan. The day the 2 brand-new, gleaming Kenworths were delivered to our yard was a milestone. The drivers circled them like they were spaceships. Frank, my old-school mechanic, was deeply suspicious of their complex electronics and emission systems. "Too many things to go wrong," he muttered, kicking a tire. But even he couldn't deny their power and efficiency. The new trucks were more than just assets. They were a symbol of our transformation. They were a declaration that Gritstone hauling was no longer just surviving. We were growing. We were becoming a force to be reckoned with. With the new trucks came new opportunities. Sarah's marketing efforts and our growing reputation for reliability started to bear fruit. We landed a major contract with a regional steel distributor, a job that required 6 trucks running full-time. We had to hire new drivers, lease more trucks, and even expand our yard. The pace was relentless, exhilarating, and exhausting. I was working 18-hour days, fueled by coffee and the sheer thrill of building my vision into a reality. It was around this time that I made another key decision. Gritstone hauling sounded small and old-fashioned. It didn't reflect who we were anymore. After a brainstorming session with Sarah and the team, we settled on a new name, Thorn Logistics. It was professional, it was strong, and I had to admit, there was a small petty part of me that liked the idea of my name being on the side of a dozen trucks rolling down the highway. Our biggest breakthrough came from an unexpected source. An old contact from my Army days was now a civilian logistics coordinator for FEMA. A hurricane was bearing down on the Gulf Coast, and they were pre-staging emergency supplies. They needed a small, flexible carrier who could handle multi-stop, rapid deployment runs into the surrounding states. The big national carriers were too slow and bureaucratic to handle the last-minute changes the mission required. He remembered my reputation for getting things done under pressure. He gave us the contract. For 2 weeks, Thorn Logistics became a vital part of the disaster relief effort. My team worked around the clock, fueled by a sense of purpose they hadn't felt before. We performed flawlessly. The FEMA contract didn't just pay well, it gave us a level of credibility that money couldn't buy. We were now a federally approved carrier. By the end of our 3rd year, the transformation was staggering. We had a fleet of 15 modern trucks. We had 25 employees. We had a state-of-the-art logistics and dispatch software system. The rusty, weed-choked yard was now a clean, efficient, and constantly busy hub of commerce. I had taken a company on the brink of death and turned it into a regional powerhouse. The inevitable family confrontation came during Thanksgiving dinner, held, as always, at Richard's palatial home. The house was filled with the scent of roasted turkey and Richard's self-satisfaction. He was holding court in the living room, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand, bragging about a new factory his company was opening in Mexico. He finally turned his attention to me, his gaze sweeping over my simple dress with the usual faint disapproval. "And Amelia," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "How is your little hobby? Still playing with your toy trucks?" A few years ago, the comment would have stung. It would have sent a jolt of anger and shame through me. But now it just felt pathetic. It was like watching a man try to attack a tank with a pea shooter. I smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile. "It's going well, Richard," I said, my voice calm and pleasant. "We're busy. Just landed a new contract with a national hardware chain. We're expanding into the Midwest." He blinked, momentarily thrown off by my lack of defensiveness. He had been expecting me to be either embarrassed or boastful. My calm confidence seemed to annoy him more than anything else. "Hardware stores?" "Well, I'm glad you're keeping busy," he said, the condescension returning. "It's important to have something to do." He turned back to his audience, dismissing me. He had no idea of the scale of my operation. In his mind, I was still the little sister with a quaint, blue-collar project. He couldn't see the truth because he had never bothered to look, and I no longer had any need for him to. I was building my own world, on my own terms, and his opinion was nothing more than irrelevant noise in the distance. As I watched him preen and boast, a new thought entered my mind. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about legacy. The next 2 years were a blur of controlled, aggressive growth. Thorn Logistics didn't just grow bigger, we grew smarter. Under Sarah's guidance, we diversified, expanding from flatbeds into refrigerated transport and LTL, less than truckload shipping, which opened up a massive new market of smaller clients. We became experts in what the industry called last-mile logistics, the final and most complex step in the supply chain. Our reputation was our greatest asset. When a job was complicated, time-sensitive, or just plain difficult, we were the company people called. I rarely spoke to Richard during this period. We existed in separate orbits. His was the world of high finance, of stockholder meetings and international trade shows. Mine was the world of dispatch screens, diesel mechanics, and the relentless 24/7 pulse of goods moving across the country. I heard through family gossip that Thorn Precision was having some trouble. Increased competition from overseas, rising material costs, the usual headwinds of a global economy. But Richard, in his typical fashion, always projected an aura of complete invincibility. It was a Monday morning when the first domino fell. I was in a meeting with Sarah planning our Q3 expansion when my phone buzzed with a news alert. Global manufacturing giant Viridian Dynamics to acquire Thorn Precision. I clicked the link, my heart giving a strange, complicated thump. The article was couched in the usual sterile corporate language. Strategic synergy, unlocking shareholder value, a new era of innovation. I knew what it really meant. Richard hadn't made a sale, he'd been bought out. A bigger shark had eaten his. I felt a surge of something I couldn't immediately name. It wasn't glee, not exactly. It was a kind of cold, quiet vindication. The man who had built his identity on being the master of his own universe was about to get a new boss. A few weeks later, my own world shifted. I received a call from the CEO of Apex Global Logistics, one of the largest national players. They had been watching us. "Ms. Thorne," the CEO said, his voice smooth and professional. "We've been very impressed with what you've built. Thorne Logistics is the dominant player in your region, and your reputation for efficiency is second to none. We'd like to discuss an acquisition." My first instinct was to say no. Thorne Logistics was my baby, born from an insult and raised on grit and determination. The idea of selling it felt like a betrayal, but this wasn't Old Man Henderson's desperate sale. This was a titan of the industry recognizing our value. "I'm willing to listen," I said, my voice betraying none of the turmoil I felt. The offer, when it came, was staggering. It was a number that would have been unimaginable to me just 5 years earlier. It was life-changing, generational wealth. It was enough to buy 100 condos in Florida. I could retire, travel the world, and never work another day in my life. I spent a weekend wrestling with the decision. I walked the yard on a quiet Sunday, the rows of silent trucks standing like monuments to the work we had done. I talked to Frank and Sarah. "Boss, you built this," Frank said, his voice thick with emotion. "You do what's right for you. We'll have your back, no matter what." Sarah, ever the strategist, laid out the pros and cons on a whiteboard. "Financially, it's a no-brainer," she concluded. "The question is, what do you want to do next?" That was the question. What did I want? The rest and relaxation Richard had prescribed for me years ago? It held no appeal. I thrived on the challenge, the problem-solving, the leadership. Simply cashing out felt like an ending, and I wasn't ready for the story to be over. An idea began to form in my mind, a move so audacious it made my own heart beat faster. I went back to my army training. You never accept the enemy's first terms. You assess their position, identify their weaknesses, and you counter with a plan that enhances your own strategic advantage. I spent a week doing a deep dive into Apex Global's operations. They were massive, but they had a weakness. Their operations in the Northeast were notoriously inefficient, a patchwork of smaller companies they had acquired but never properly integrated. They had the size, but they lacked the cohesive, ground-level expertise that we had. I called the CEO back. "Thank you for your generous offer," I said. "I'm not interested." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "However," I continued, "I have a counter-proposal." I laid it out for him. Apex would acquire Thorne Logistics for the offered price. But the deal came with a condition. They would consolidate their entire Northeast operations into a new division, and I would be its president, with full operational autonomy, a multi-year contract, and a seat on the Apex Global Corporate Board. I wasn't just selling my company. I was proposing to take over a piece of theirs. It was the boldest move of my life. I was leveraging my success into a position of even greater power and responsibility. For a moment, I thought he would laugh. Instead, he said, "Ms. Thorne, you are a very interesting woman. Send me the proposal." While my high-stakes negotiation with Apex was happening in secret, Richard was living his own new reality. He called me one evening, his voice tight with a frustration he was trying to disguise as bravado. "It's a fantastic deal, Mia. Viridian has incredible resources. This will take Thorn Precision to the next level. He was trying to sell me the corporate press release. I'm staying on, of course. They want my expertise. I'll be leading the transition as a vice president of strategic integration. The demotion was obvious, even in the inflated title. He was no longer the king in his castle. He was a middle manager in someone else's empire. He complained about the new bureaucracy, the endless meetings, the consultants from Viridian who were crawling all over his company, questioning every decision he'd ever made. They have no respect for what I've built, he grumbled. I listened, making noncommittal sounds of sympathy. He was so wrapped up in his own drama that he barely asked about me. Things still good with the trucks? He asked as an afterthought. Yes, Richard, I said. Things are very good. 2 weeks later, my deal with Apex was finalized. The contracts were signed. The wire transfer hit my bank account, a number so large it looked like a phone number. But the money was secondary. The real prize was the position. I was now president of Apex Northeast. My territory included our original region, plus all of New England and the mid-Atlantic states. It was a massive, complex, and underperforming division. It was the biggest logistical challenge I had ever faced. I was ecstatic. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place during a transition call with the Apex executive team. One of the VPs was reviewing the portfolio of assets under the new Northeast division. There's one more thing, Amelia, he said. Viridian Dynamics is one of our largest corporate clients. We handle a significant portion of their national supply chain. As part of their recent acquisition of Thorn Precision, we're taking over the logistical oversight for that facility as well. It's currently a mess. You'll need to go in there and get their house in order. Their transitional manager is a guy named Richard Thorn. Any relation? I looked out my office window at the bustling yard, at the trucks bearing my family name, soon to be repainted with the Apex logo. A slow smile spread across my face. The universe, it seemed, had a profound sense of irony. Yes, I said, my voice perfectly level. You could say that. I know him very well. The day was set. The formal transition meeting for Thorn Precision's integration into the Viridian Apex logistical framework. My new executive assistant, a sharp young man provided by Apex, had scheduled it in the main boardroom at the Thorn Precision headquarters. My brother's old boardroom. I chose my outfit with the care of a soldier preparing her dress uniform for a general's inspection. A dark navy power suit, tailored to perfection, a simple, elegant blouse, low heels that made no sound on the marble floors. I wanted to look like what I was, the boss. I arrived a few minutes early with two of my new VPs from Apex. The receptionist, a woman who had worked for Richard for a decade, looked at me with confusion. Can I help you, miss? She asked, her eyes flicking to the Apex badges my colleagues wore. We're here for the 10 o'clock integration meeting, I said calmly. Amelia Thorn. She blinked, recognition dawning. Oh, Miss Thorn, Richard's sister. Of course, he's expecting the team from Apex. I'll let him know you're here to say hello. That won't be necessary, I said, giving her a polite smile. We can just go on up. We walked past her, leaving her looking flustered and confused. The boardroom was exactly as I remembered it from a long-ago Christmas party. A long, polished mahogany table, high-backed leather chairs, and a commanding view of the city. My brother was not yet there. His office was now a smaller one down the hall. We took our seats at the head of the table, my VPs on either side of me, and waited. 5 minutes later, the door swung open and Richard bustled in, a strained, salesman-like smile plastered on his face. He was carrying a leather-bound portfolio and trying to project an air of collaborative importance. He saw my two VPs first and extended his hand. Gentlemen, Richard Thorn, great to finally meet the Apex team. I'm looking forward to a very productive partnership. His eyes then scanned down the table and landed on me. His smile faltered. His hand dropped to his side. A look of complete and utter bewilderment washed over his features. Mia? What on earth are you doing here? He glanced around, as if expecting to find a catering tray in my hands. Did you come to wish me luck? That's sweet of you, but this is a very important corporate meeting. The condescension was so automatic, so ingrained, he couldn't stop himself even in his confusion. The air in the room grew thick and still. My two VPs exchanged a quick, uncomfortable glance. They knew the story. I let the silence stretch out, letting him stand there, off balance and exposed. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply looked at him, my expression neutral, professional. I watched the gears turning in his head, the confusion warring with his innate sense of superiority. He opened his mouth to say something else, probably another dismissive comment, but I cut him off. From my briefcase, I removed a single, heavy-stock business card. I slid it down the polished surface of the table. It spun slowly, silently, coming to a perfect stop directly in front of him. He looked down at it. On the card, in crisp, embossed lettering, were the words, Amelia Thorne, President, Apex Northeast. He read it once, then he read it again. His face, which had been confused, slowly began to drain of all color. His jaw went slack. His eyes lifted from the card and met mine. In them, I saw the complete shattering collapse of his entire world order. The little sister with the respectable pension. The woman playing with toy trucks. The hobbyist he had patted on the head. All of it disintegrated in a silent, blinding flash of comprehension. The room was utterly quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the building's ventilation system. "Richard," I said, my voice calm, clear, and imbued with an authority he had never heard from me before. "Please, have a seat." He stumbled into the nearest chair, his movements clumsy, his eyes still locked on mine. "As I believe you've been told," I continued, gesturing to my VPs, "Apex is now handling the logistical oversight for this facility, which means you now report to me." I paused, letting the words land with the force of a physical blow. "It seems your division falls under my operational command. We have a lot to discuss about the future of Thorne Precision. Let's begin with your performance metrics for the last quarter." I picked up my pen, clicked it once, and looked at him expectantly, the very picture of a boss waiting for a subordinate to begin his report. The look of pure, unadulterated shock on his face was more satisfying than any shout, any argument, any "I told you so" ever could have been. He was, for the first time in his life, utterly and completely speechless. The meeting that followed was the most excruciatingly awkward hour of Richard's life. He was a man adrift, stripped of all his usual tools of power and persuasion. His bluster was gone, replaced by a stunned, halting obedience. I kept the tone of the meeting strictly professional. I was not his sister, I was his superior. I asked pointed questions about inventory management, shipping inefficiencies, and supplier contracts. He fumbled for answers, his gaze repeatedly flicking from my face to the business card that still sat on the table in front of him, as if it were an unexploded bomb. My VPs, following my lead, treated him like any other mid-level manager. They were polite but firm, questioning his data and pointing out discrepancies. At one point, Richard tried to fall back on old habits. "Well, Mia, as I'm sure you understand, we've always had a unique approach here." I cut him off, my voice cool. "The name is Amelia in a professional setting, Richard. And going forward, your unique approach will be the Apex approach. Is that clear?" He paled and nodded, mumbling, "Yes. Yes, of course. Amelia." The correction, the assertion of my authority in this new context seemed to wound him more deeply than anything else. He was no longer setting the terms. He was a cog in a machine, and I was the one operating it. When the meeting concluded, I gave him a list of action items and a deadline. He took the paper with a trembling hand. As we stood to leave, I paused at the door. "I expect your first progress report on my desk by Friday at 5, I said, then walked out without a backward glance. The drive back to my old office, the headquarters of what was formerly Thorne Logistics, felt surreal. I had asked my core team, Frank, Sarah, and the two original drivers who were still with me, Dave and Mike, to meet me for a late lunch. I walked into the familiar, bustling dispatch office, which now felt small, but comfortingly real. They were waiting for me in the break room, the same grimy room where they had first eyed me with suspicion 5 years earlier. I told them everything: the Apex acquisition, my new role as president, and the details of my meeting with my brother. When I finished, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then Dave let out a loud whoop. "Get out of here!" he yelled, a huge grin spreading across his face. "You're his boss? His actual boss?" Mike was shaking his head in disbelief, laughing. Sarah was beaming, her eyes shining with pride. I knew you were a genius, she said. I knew it from day one. But it was Frank's reaction that meant the most. The grizzled old mechanic, a man of few words and even fewer compliments, walked over to me. He looked me up and down, then a slow, proud smile spread across his face. He put a heavy, calloused hand on my shoulder. I knew you had it in you, Major, he said, his voice thick with genuine emotion. The whole damn time, you showed 'em all. In that moment, surrounded by my real family, the people who had stood by me, worked with me, and believed in me when I was just a woman with a crazy idea, the victory felt complete. It wasn't about the money or the title. It was about this loyalty, this shared triumph. We ordered a feast of pizza and celebrated our impossible journey. A tiny, struggling trucking company that had, against all odds, conquered a world. The following weeks were a trial for Richard. He was forced to navigate a corporate structure that he didn't build and couldn't control. The ultimate humiliation came when he made a significant error in an inventory projection, a mistake that in his old life he could have buried or blamed on a subordinate. In the new Apex structure, he had to submit a formal failure report. That report didn't even go to me directly. It went to Sarah Chen, whom I had promoted to be my vice president of operations. I can only imagine the galling sting of that meeting. My brother, the great Richard Thorne, having to sit across from a woman 30 years his junior, a woman my little hobby had hired, and explain his incompetence. Sarah, ever the professional, told me she handled it by the book. She was polite, direct, and offered him resources to improve his performance. For Richard, that professional kindness was probably the most excruciating part of it all. He was no longer a titan to be feared or placated. He was a performance problem to be managed. His old colleagues at Thorne Precision, those who had been kept on, saw the shift. The whispers in the hallway, the averted eyes, the sudden silence when he approached. He was a king in exile in his own former kingdom, a constant walking reminder that the old regime was over. He was isolated, his authority stripped away, left with nothing but a fancy title and the crushing weight of his new reality. A full year passed. The integration of the Northeast Division was a massive, complex undertaking, but it was the kind of challenge I was built for. We streamlined operations, upgraded fleets, retrained staff, and turned the most unprofitable division in the company into one of its most efficient. My old Thorne logistics team formed the nucleus of my new leadership, with Sarah, Frank, Dave, and Mike all taking on senior roles, their loyalty and expertise proving invaluable. Frank, using the generous buyout I had given him for his shares in the old company, was finally able to talk about a real retirement, planning to buy a fishing boat and a small cabin in the mountains. I had not only built a future for myself, but for them as well. I didn't see or speak to Richard much outside of quarterly performance reviews, which were always stilted and formal. Then, one Tuesday, my assistant informed me that Richard had requested a personal meeting, not as my subordinate, but as my brother. I agreed, curious, and told him to meet me at my office after hours. He arrived looking diminished. The expensive suit was the same, but it seemed to hang on him differently. The arrogant fire in his eyes had been replaced by a weary resignation. We sat in the comfortable chairs in my office, the city lights twinkling outside the large window. For a long time, he just stared at his hands. I wanted to talk to you, he began, his voice hesitant, unfamiliar. He took a deep breath. Mia, I was wrong. The words came out quiet and strained, as if they had physically hurt him to say. For years, for my whole life, I think, I looked down on you, your career, your choices. I thought I knew what success was. I thought it was this. He gestured vaguely at the skyline. Money, power, being the one in charge. I saw your pension as a pittance, a consolation prize for not competing in the real world. He finally looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine shame in his eyes. What you've done, what you built from nothing, with your own hands and your own mind, it's more real than anything I ever did. I didn't build Thorne Precision. My father did. I just expanded it, managed it. You created something. You took a pile of junk and you turned it into this. He looked around my office, at the awards on the wall, at the thriving company I commanded. And then you came in and you fixed my mess too. You did it better than I ever could have. He swallowed hard. I'm sorry, Mia. I'm sorry for laughing at you. I'm sorry for underestimating you. I'm sorry for being an arrogant fool. You are the most impressive person I know, and I was too proud and too stupid to see it. The apology was raw, and it felt real. He wasn't asking for his old job back or for special treatment. It seemed like a genuine confession, a deathbed repentance of his own ego. It was the apology I had fantasized about for years. I listened, letting his words settle in the quiet room. A part of me, the hurt little sister from all those years ago, wanted to revel in this moment. But looking at the broken man in front of me, I felt only a kind of quiet, sad peace. The need for his approval, the burning desire to prove him wrong, had vanished so long ago I hadn't even noticed it was gone. My success wasn't for him. It was for me. Thank you, Richard, I said, my voice gentle. I appreciate you saying that. I accepted his apology, but I didn't erase the line between us. I couldn't. He had been humbled by circumstance, not by a true change of heart that came from within. His apology was the result of his failure, not a product of my success on its own. We could be family again, in a new, more honest way, but the old hierarchy was gone forever, and the professional boundary would remain. He would continue to work at the company, and he would be judged on his performance, just like anyone else. My validation no longer came from his words of praise, but from the quiet hum of the logistics hub I commanded, from the loyalty of my team, and from the deep, unshakable knowledge of my own worth. Standing on a catwalk overlooking the vast, cavernous floor of our main distribution center, I watched the ballet of forklifts and trucks, a symphony of logistics that I conduct. The roar of engines and the beeping of scanners is the music of my success. I sometimes think back to that retirement ceremony, to the woman I was, standing on the precipice of an unknown future, stung by the ridicule of the person who should have been my biggest champion. I realize now that my brother's mockery was a gift. His low expectations became the launching pad for my ambition. He saw a modest pension. I saw seed capital. He saw a woman past her prime. I saw an expert with 20 years of unparalleled experience. His blindness to my potential became my greatest camouflage. While he was watching the front door, I was building a new one, brick by brick, right behind him. So, what do you think? Was my brother's apology the real deal, or was he just trying to save what was left of his career? I'd love to hear your take in the comments section below. Your perspectives are always so fascinating. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories about turning the tables and finding your own strength. So many of you have shared your own incredible journeys, and it creates a powerful community here. Remember, sometimes the greatest superpower you can have is to be underestimated. It gives you the freedom to build your victory in silence and the satisfaction of letting your success make all the noise. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I wish you all the strength in the world to build your own.